Good morning, everybody. I'm told we are now live, so mind your P's and Q's when you speak, please. Don't want to embarrass yourself. Before we start, I need to inform you that it is being live streamed and recorded. Please also note that all remote participants are muted at the outset of the meeting and are only able to speak at the invitation of the chair. Please raise your virtual hand if you wish to speak, and then only unmute when the chair invites you to make your contribution. As chair, I may ask that you are muted if you do not participate in this way. For those in the room, the usual reminder, please, about silencing phones and silencing laptops. We have remote attendees. I think we should have Heather Kidd, Ruth House and Rogers in the room, and Gary Groves. Gary is able to participate, but of course, as he's not in the room, won't be able to vote. So we'll move to apologies. Only had one, Charles Shackley Bennett, sent us apologies, no substitution. Item 2 is disclosable interests. Members are reminded that they must declare their disclosable pecuniary interests and other registrable or non-registrable interests in any matter being considered at the meeting, as set out in Appendix B of the Members' Code of Conduct, and consider if they should leave the room prior to the item being considered. Further advice can be sought from the monitoring officer in advance of the meeting. Does anybody have such an interest to declare? No? That's good. Thank you very much. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. To compare the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of September 2005. Are you all content? No? Would you like to move?
Sorry, yes, a question on those minutes, if I may. The performance monitoring report section talked about service director advised a response provided after the meeting. This is the top of page 3. I don't recall seeing anything. And as a wider point, having been a councillor for just over 6 months now, I've yet to see a single action recorded in any minutes that's followed up on. Because I would expect this to be done, and we could follow up and say, has this been done? Has this not been done? And then following on, the following sentence talks about a future agenda item, and I don't know when that is going to be brought to this committee.
Right. Okay. We don't need legal with us. No. I mean, in terms of the style of the minutes, we're not normally in the practice of putting actions in minutes. Cabinet, you will have seen, sent round an action report. We don't actually do that. I suppose we could and think about doing that, but it's not normal practice here for that to happen. The minutes really are to give a feel for the meeting rather than a word-for-word verbatim record. And inevitably, some things do get skipped. I think if you leave that with me, we'll have a conversation outside the meeting about future minutes to see if we make any changes and what those changes might be.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm not trying to change the world in one go, but I mean, I reckon, but this particular one talks about a follow-up response.
No, point is taken.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. But that aside, you're comfortable with the minutes?
David, Rachel's got her hand up. Rachel's here for the performance report this time. I don't know whether she might be able to enlighten us as to that point.
So, sorry, Rachel.
Apologies.
A long way away from where I'm sitting. It's hard to see it.
Apologies. Just to say that I will look into the minutes, and obviously the previous service director has now left, and I will look into that and take the action outside of the meeting, so you can record that. And apologies that I've missed that in the handover, but I will pick that up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Item. Sorry, Graham.
David, I was just going to support my colleague's point there. I think it's an important one where a scrutiny committee has been told some follow-up information is to be produced. I think it would be very useful to have that as an action. And I'm not thinking of this committee. I'm thinking of another committee in another place. I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
I am being unduly kind with you both this morning. because the minutes really are not for discussion unless it is a matter of fact. But we heard what you say. We will take that on board, and we'll reconsider how we produce minutes, or if indeed we need to produce something a little bit different to support the minutes. But leave that one with us. So, but thank you for that. Item 4, public question time, there are none. Item 5, member question time, there are none. So that takes us to item 6, the financial monitoring report, quarter 2, 2025-26. James, would you want to? Sorry?
You missed public question time. I don't know if we've got a member of the public here.
No, he hasn't. John hasn't put a question in.
Oh, right. That's fine.
No, I didn't.
No,
You missed
that.
I spoke to him earlier, and he's giving us a day off. So item 6, James, and then I'll come to Councillor Evans. So if I can make a start, please, James.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the financial monitoring report for the second quarter of 25-26. So this is based on expenditure through to the end of September 2025, extrapolated forward and projected through to the end of the financial year. The projected overspend, which has been talked about for a few weeks now, and is of no surprise, but is still very concerning, is a forecast overspend by the end of the year of £47.1 million. So this is significantly in excess of previous projections, and this follows a lot of work that's been undertaken, that was undertaken over the October period and continues now through into November as we work through the period 7 report in relation to reviewing the actuals and actual expenditure as at the 30th of September, looking at all of the projected savings and identifying whether there was optimism bias built into those savings. So it's moving through each of those lines, line by line, with service directors and service managers as necessary to identify how comfortable we are that those savings will be delivered before the 31st of March. This is not about those savings being delivered ultimately, it's about whether they're delivered by the 31st of March. Also a review of projections around particularly difficult to estimate demand pressures, so that would particularly be within adults and children's services, to identify whether the projections in there also needed further reconsideration, particularly as we're going into the winter period. So as a result of that much more detailed review as at quarter 2, we came up with revised scenarios, which are set out in table 1 in section 2.7, which provided that central review of 47.1. The favourable is slightly better at 45.4. The adverse is worse at 52.9. And those are set out, the reasoning for those is set out in more detail in table 2, along with some other considerations that need to be taken into account. So the result of that projection, shown in table 1, compared to our available general fund balance, is that in all scenarios we would be in an illegal position by the end of the year, unable to balance our budget. Again, as has been widely discussed and publicised, myself and the Chief Executive in particular have been in conversations with MHCLG to discuss exceptional financial support in year for the 25-26 financial year. That in-year financial support has focused particularly around the projections within the revenue account and the 47.1 I've just mentioned. And we have requested initially £15 million worth of exceptional financial support in year for that. And we met with MHCLG at the end of last week, so on Friday afternoon, I think it was, and we re-emphasised that request and also laid down that we are still working through those projections. We still haven't published period 7, and we would wish to see the period 7 projection before we made our formal application. We are pressing MHCLG nevertheless to give us at least an in principle decision around that position, because clearly with the level of overspend that we are showing and the level of general fund balance that we have available to us, we don't have other options to balance that overall picture. In section 8.2 in table 3, there is a breakdown of that £47.1 million and the overspends and underspends that are shown against each service area. And later in the report, in one of the appendices, there's a breakdown of the shift from period 5 to period 6 to show how that has moved over the period. What you will have seen, and you can see in that table on the right hand side, is that there has been shifts from period 5, a small improvement in adult social care within care and wellbeing, and a reduction in relation to children and young people. But the biggest variation is around corporate, and you'll see that that's deteriorated by around about £8.5 million from period 5 to period 6. This is predominantly due to the level of savings that are held at a corporate level, which is shown within corporate services. So there isn't actually a directorate there. This is just is to separate all those things out from the service areas that are held centrally. That budget itself is negative because it holds all of the central grants and holds all of the savings that are not allocated out into service areas. A review of those centrally unallocated savings was undertaken in period 6, and that's the majority of that deterioration between period 5 and period 6. At the bottom, you'll see the funding elements, and just to be clear, things like council tax business rates, top-up grant, etc., are fixed for the year. So regardless of collection rates around council tax, for example, that would impact on a surplus or a deficit going into next financial year. We precept the £219 million from the collection fund, so that is guaranteed as we go into this financial year. The savings section I'll pull out in terms of section 10. This shows the level of savings overall compared to the £59.9 million that was allocated for this year. You'll see that in terms of the new savings, which were the savings specifically identified for the current year 25-26 and agreed in February, we have 73% delivery, which is good, not perfect but good. And in terms of demand management initiatives, which are predominantly across adults and children's services, which is about offsetting some of the growth requirements in those areas, again, forecast delivery is good in terms of 81%. The shortfall is in those savings that are carried forward. So although £7 million is identified as being delivered, it's a £41 million saving that is required there. And so that 16% delivery brings the overall delivery down to 36%. But it's just worth remembering that it is that carried forward that is the problem area, and it's that carried forward that's sat within the corporate line of the budget. The table at table 5 and 11.3 then just goes through the general fund balance position, sets out how that £34.3 million of general fund balance is sat, the overspend and the estimated balance, and then the assumption around exceptional financial support of £15 million, bringing that back into a positive position, leaving around £2.2 million in the general fund balance to take us over the remaining months of the year. As I say, we're not yet into the winter period. Just starting that, we just started obviously to see things like flooding, but there's lots of elements that can lead into discharges from hospital, can lead into flooding and snow and ice events across the county. So the question we're asking ourselves is £2.2 million enough resilience in relation to the general fund balance that's shown there? Hence, we will look at the period 7, and again, we're not going to hold anything back in terms of reviewing that period 7 report. If there is anything that comes out as part of that, we will flag that publicly, and if necessary, the application that will go in for exceptional financial support in December will take account of that final figure. Elsewhere within the report, there is a breakdown of the capital programme and where we are, and also in the appendices talks about the level of capital receipts that we've received or due to receive over the year, which is another element of exceptional financial support that we've discussed. The dedicated schools grant, just to mention that we are sat at the moment in terms of a £17 million deficit in the current financial year. That doesn't show against the general fund balance, that doesn't show against the general fund. Nevertheless, that £17.5 million is a deficit that's carried forward. We feel it from a cash point of view. We have to manage the fact that effectively there's been a £17 million overspend in that area. And by the end of this year, we believe that deficit will grow to something between 35 and 40 million pounds. We've got 37 million as the estimate at the moment. This is a worrying picture. It's considerably lower than a number of other authorities, some whose DSG deficits are running into the hundreds of millions now. There is a statutory override, which means we don't have to take account of that within our general fund, but that statutory override runs out in March 2028, at which point, all things being equal, that would then fall on the authority and would therefore require another form, I would imagine, of exceptional financial support to cover that. Hence, we need to use the next 2 years to try and bring that deficit down as far as we possibly can. Detail is in the appendices, and I'll leave it there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. That's right. Is there anything you want to add to that before I open it up for questions?
Unless there's a... Oh, following up from James's one, if one looks back at the histories of the monthly returns that has been published, the financial statements, you'll see that there was a continuing deterioration of it, and the Cabinet took the decision that in period 6, quarter 2, we really needed to do a deep dive and check every figure that we possibly could, just to ensure that we knew exactly where we were, because the deterioration was not expected, and the 12.789, which has come forward here, was not expected, but it is hoped that this is an accurate figure, and it should come back as the boards that have been appointed start to take effect and really start to monitor what expenditure, what income is coming into the council. However, there are a couple of points I would wish to make on behalf of the present Cabinet, is that if one looks at the savings that were due for this year, you'll see in it that it's split into 3 parts. The first 2 parts add up to £18.19 million, which were the new savings for this year. And if one looks at it, 78% of those have already been marked as being capable of being saved. There's 22% left, and we will do our attempt, and the officers will, and I congratulate the work that the officers are doing in actually doing it. It's a second part, the carryover figure of 41.186 million. That is where we are in difficulty. And if one looks at the charts at the back, you will see that there's over £17 million there listed as, and I don't want that word, and I don't like the word, and I wish we wouldn't use it, resizing, i.e. staff reductions. If you have a look at the last year's outturn figure, there were actually 217 staff left on packages. That's not the normal churn where people leave to go for another job. There were 217 staff left during the 24-25 at a cost of 12.9 million. If one looks at the year before that, it was 76. So one can see the amount of staff that left during 24-25. And I do not believe that we can reduce our staff below where we are now. We can, maybe via the boards, just to check it, but there are, and I use the word complaints, there are comments being made by our present staff to say that there isn't enough there now to actually complete the work that we expected. I get residents come to me, and maybe members around the panel get comments from residents of there, I'm getting no answer, getting nothing there. And we have reduced ours, and I use the word we, we have reduced our staff, and I'm not sure that we can do it again. But we do need time to actually look at processes, procedures, to try, but we will succeed in maybe not this year, but next year and the following year, to make this council sustainable, because that's where we need to be. The leader and deputy leader and the executive directors have been talking to London to get permission to actually borrow £15 million for this current year to assist, to look after the 12.789 that is there, so we can return a balanced budget at the end of this current year, which legally we must do. If we do not get the money from London, and London will then put commissioners in, the commissioners will do exactly the same, I would think, as what is being proposed now. So what we're trying to do is to take immediate action to show that we are tackling it. To me, it should have been done years ago. If one looks at previous budgets, you'll see that it's gone down and down and down. And if you look in the outturn report, that is there, you'll see that the general reserves and the earmarked reserves have been taken down for a number of years, and they're now at a level on the earmarked reserves where it isn't felt safe, possible to actually remove any money from there. I could talk some more, Chairman, but I'll leave it at that for now, and maybe answer any questions that members have got.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed. I think everyone, I'll come to you, Rosemary, I think everybody in this room has the same experience as far as staffing levels is concerned. I have things that just cannot be processed or progressed because there's nobody to do it. We can't go any further. I absolutely agree with you.
If I can, Jem, yeah, it's a message that I think we all need to give to our staff, that enough is enough. We want to see how we can operate this council together, officers and members working together, and to deliver what residents want. And that's why we want to stay in charge of this council. We don't want people coming in from London, we'll say, doing it.
Indeed, I absolutely agree. Rosemary.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that last point. We have to be a functioning council, don't we? Not just one that's cheaper. We have to still work and provide our services. So I totally support that. My questions are about the, I've got 3 questions, please, on the table 1, the forecast scenarios. So the central position is much as we expected. But my question is about the sort of greatly reduced variance between the adverse and the favourable position that we're projecting, and I have my own ideas as to why that is. That it looks far less worrying. I mean, I can remember this table with something like, I don't know, variances of 50% improved and 50% worse, or even worse than that in the past. So perhaps if you could comment specifically on that, James, that would be great. The next question is, when do we expect exactly between now and March to be in an illegal position? Obviously, we can't calculate for floods and anything else that might happen in the winter, but when do we expect that? That's 6 months or 5 months, 4.5 months probably, isn't it, to go? So where's the crunch point? And when do we expect a response on the 15 million from MHCLG? Do we have an indication of that?
Thanks, Jeff. So in terms of the adverse position, take you to table 2 and just work through the first few lines of that. So table 2 sets out 7 different financial elements, which all are risks and all fit under the key risk of inability to deliver a balanced budget within a year. The first line, which is around savings delivery, so the central value there is 38.571. That's the figure that we are currently estimating in terms of those savings that will not be delivered in year. In the central scenario, we therefore take the greens because they're either delivered or they're in the process of being delivered. But we also take the ambers, which are the ones which have a plan in place, but there is still some uncertainty about whether that'll be delivered. So the first thing in relation to why the adverse is worse is because in the adverse scenario, we assume that those ambers won't be delivered. So none of those would be delivered, and that's 2.761 million shown in the table. In terms of the next line down, which is the social care demand, we separate out social care demand across adults and children's because it is unlike any other part of the local authority, and can shift very, very quickly due to just demand pressures, which are absolutely beyond the control of the authority, and puts us in a very difficult position whereby we are having to undertake expenditure which we don't have against a service which is a statutory responsibility to deliver. So we can't put vulnerable people at risk, and therefore we have to cover those costs. So the central figure is based on the current assumptions. The adverse figure, which is slightly higher, takes account of the risks that we have seen and have identified over the previous months of the previous year, and just tries to extrapolate those out over the remainder of the financial year. So kind of 5 months worth of that risk built into there. And then the final element is around other unbudgeted pressures. So this is a minus figure at the moment. So this is saying there are a number of one-off areas within the authority where we're not able to deliver a saving, i.e. a saving that can be counted ongoing, but we're able to reduce our costs in the short term. Now that may be, which again links back to the earlier points made before, that may link to things like vacancies. So part of the reason is not just taking staff out in terms of permanent savings, but it also might be in terms of holding posts open, which we can't keep in the long term, but we're holding in the short term. And other assumptions around applications of grants and those sorts of things. So we've within the adverse scenario, there's another £2 million there relating to non-delivery over the remaining 6 months of the year. That is. So it's those three elements together that then show the adverse figure in relation to that. In terms of the position and the illegality and kind of where we sit with that, I did say previously that period 6 would be a point at which we would not have to kind of make a call necessarily around the section 114, but would be a significant line in the sand in relation to that. Clearly, the kind of the scale of that decision partly warranted the deep dive into period 6. There was no way that we wanted to be in a situation where there was significant levels of uncertainty around our projections as at that point. So that's why we've tried to make sure everything is out on the table. I think period 7 is going to be really, really important because there are still areas that are being reviewed. There are still areas of concern that we are working through. I would hope that in those areas that are still being worked through, there will be some improvements as well as we go through those. But there is always the risk that there will be more deteriorations and there will be improvements as part of that. And there is a risk that those deteriorations go beyond what we can afford. And I think the problem, just to be clear with everybody, is things like winter pressures across social care, the sorts of things that we would expect to see in a financial year across the winter period are knowns. We know about these things, and that's the reason why we hold the general fund balance. And our problem is because we've exhausted that general fund balance predominantly due to non-delivery of savings. We don't have that leeway, and so we're having to be much, much tighter, and therefore there's a higher element of risk around those projections that are there. If I was sitting here now and we've got £5 million sat in general fund balance, that's not enough, but I'd be sitting here knowing that £5 million would be significant mitigation of the risk of going through winter. Sitting here knowing that we have no general fund balance and only potentially 2 million if we get the exceptional financial support, that heightens the risk around every projection that we've got. So therefore, effectively, I'm reserving my right to go through into period 7 and see whether that position is reflective of and accurately kind of reflecting what we've seen at period 6, or whether there is further information that comes out as part of that review that we need to take account of. After period 7, we will be in December. We will hopefully have got a consideration from an in-principle decision from MACLG. They haven't indicated that they would do that, but they have indicated that they are speaking to ministers about this. And so that will help us to determine. That's ultimately the test of whether we're in a legal or an illegal position. So I think that covers the last 2 points.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? So, oh, sorry, Dawn was first. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. It's come up, members and officers and the reports have stated that budgets and savings projections have been rather unrealistic, shall we say. I need assurance that going forward things will be more accurate. So I'd actually like to understand more about why were assessments and budgets of spending and savings so far out? What budget setting methods are used? What exactly is being done to improve budget setting going forwards? And what assumptions are being used when setting budgets, and how are these tested? Because optimism bias is a problem, and we need to be able to sort of like scrutinise these kinds of decisions. Second point was clearly states that all non-essential spending is to be stopped. I have concerns that this might not be happening in certain areas, so I would like some reassurance that if it isn't statutory, it's not going to be spent, particularly in this survival year that we're in. And finally, under 10.2 paragraph 3, where you talk about demand management initiatives, you say that they will reduce care costs by, in quotes, adopting sustainable approaches. Well, I can't scrutinise generalisations, so I'd really need a little bit more information on what these actually are. Thank you.
There's 2 elements here, I think, Dawn, before James speaks. First things that you talked about, I think that's a piece of work that we have to do. We have to have an understanding of how the budget is put together and how we got into this situation. But I think it's probably appropriate under item 9, which is the work programme, because we're probably going to need a task and finish for it and probably start in the new year. So that if that bit, James, you just park that one and deal with the rest. Thank you.
So just to kind of work through those as far as I can, therefore. In terms of just to give an overview in terms of the estimates and the way that they are set, the standard approach that we've used, which has been served us well over the previous years, has been to do an in-depth review over the August, September, October period, to go through each service area with service managers and to run through where they are in terms of their savings delivery, where they are in terms of their requirements within service, any restructures or changes that are required, and also to look at the demand management projections as part of that. The reality is that when we have done those projections in the last year, we saw a significant deterioration, particularly around adults, which meant that the budget setting earlier in that year therefore had inbuilt into that a shortfall in terms of the level of demand that we would expect to see. So what that really means is that reviewing that budget in April, May time of this year would have delivered us a different position. And you can see that in relation to the pressures within adults and children's. They're not about non-delivery of savings, they're about the level of demand that those services are seeing. So I think that we could have predicted more of that had we set the budget in April and May. The problem is that we have a very tight timetable that we work to, and therefore we have to do that work earlier in the year, go out to consultation, and then produce a budget which council sign off. So I'm comfortable that the information that we had in February, that we presented to council in February, was accurate and was the best that we had available at that time. That brings me on to the second point, which is then the problem that we have is that the budget that we would wish to set across all service areas across the council, when you add all of that up, comes to more than the available budget that we've got. And that leaves us in a dilemma. And the choices that we have are either that we can't set an illegal budget, so therefore we have to bring those two things in. One option is to request exceptional financial support, and requesting that and then delivering a longer term plan to take us off exceptional financial support. The alternative is that we have a plan in place to say we will deliver those savings, whatever that would take. Now, because those savings related to areas that have been identified in 24-25 around a reduction in staffing, a change in third-party spend, and a review of income generation, it was felt at the time that there would be sufficient plans brought forward following a restructuring of the senior team and bringing in of a new operating model, that would enable us to then set a plan for this year which would deliver those savings. That's where we come into the optimism bias point, because clearly that was overly optimistic in hindsight, and also in hindsight there were more pressures within adults and children's than had been identified. The important point is that that's with hindsight. So we are looking at this situation now with much better information, and we're able to look back and say, there are things here that need to be dealt with. I think that the point that I'm trying to make here is it's not just these things that are very, very visible. There are some big numbers here and some big issues here, but that's not the extent of the problem. There are more issues under the skin, and all of you know those issues under the skin because you're seeing more and more of those things as we work through. So I think the strategy, which has been a much more short-term, take the money out of the services in ways that are possible, not necessarily for the long-term benefit of the organisation. That's the bit that's changing. And if we're going to change that entire approach, then we do have to make sure that the foundations that we're building that on are firm, and that means we need to get everything out on the table. And this is painful for everybody around the table in terms of what this looks like. This is incredibly painful for people like me and Tanya, because we're trying to uncover everything that we can find within the organisation and get us to the most kind of the strongest foundations that we can to build a budget for next year. So I'm expecting the budget for 26-27. At the moment, we took a report to Cabinet on the 15th of October, which said there was an £82 million gap next year. £82 million in 1 year is a phenomenal gap. Now, that was based on non-delivery of savings, which at period 5 was estimated 26 million. Well, you can see that figure is now significantly higher than 26 million. It's more like 35 million pounds. So we know that 82 million pounds is going to be higher next year. We also know that, as I've said, we're continuing to work through in period 7 in relation to adults, and in particular in relation to children's projections, and we're looking much more at the underlying information that's not sat in terms of financial projections, but around those individuals that are kind of on the radar of social workers, and trying to then work through as best as we can. So what would that look like based on our future projections? And as you would imagine, that doesn't look good when you work through that and kind of work through that detail. So this situation, I think, is going to continue to deteriorate. I don't think it's going to deteriorate to the level that we've talked about here, but it is going to, because when we get to February, I have got to be in a position whereby I can give as much assurance as I can to council that the budget that we are going to be setting for 26/7 is going to be the correct budget and deal with all of these issues. The fallback, the thing that allows me to do that is that change in strategy and the acceptance that we're going to need exceptional financial support in 26/7. That's the only possible way that we're going to be able to manage this. And I've said previously, and I'll be saying this constantly, the measure of whether we have got this right is in 26/7. Key measure will be we don't see massive overspends in any particular service area, because that way we know that we've got the budget closer to correct. There is, of course, a caveat with that. We've got to be really, really careful that we don't therefore overcompensate and set ourselves too easy a target, if that's not the right terminology, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. We need to be really careful that we don't go to overstep that and leave ourselves in a position whereby we are setting too lenient a budget. We've got a very, very difficult position to get back from. We just need to get that position as reasonable and as realistic as we possibly can. In terms of the non-essential spend, has this been stopped? I would hope that we're stopping a lot of this expenditure. I think the difficulty with these things is that if I was seeing, we were meeting 3 times a week to look at non-essential and essential spend, and if I was seeing loads and loads of things there that I could stop at that level, Tanya and I could sit there and stop it, then clearly the whole thing is broken, isn't it? Because people are putting through things which are clearly non-essential and expecting us to stop them. So the logic therefore plays out. If I don't see anything coming forward that I don't stop, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Is there any point in having the board if they don't stop any expenditure? But the reality is, if all the expenditure is being stopped before it gets to the board, then it's working. How do I measure that? How do I know that? And that's one of the questions we're asking ourselves. Is it possible to identify all of that essential spend or non-essential spend that's been stopped, that's never got anywhere because in somebody's head they've gone, well, I've no point issuing that because I can't do it, can I, under the rules? We are seeing some, however, we are seeing some things that come through where we are asking the question, and again, I've said this before, I think it's really important to emphasise, I am not seeing anything coming through that is not justified. Everything that's coming through is justified. The question is not, is it justified, is it in the current circumstances essential? And that's the bit where we have to make a judgment. And again, there are really, really difficult decisions to be taken around that, because it may not be essential right now, but actually it links into other parts which we can understand the reason why you would undertake that expenditure right now, because it impacts on something else or it leads to something else. That is not an easy process, because that takes time, because Tanya and I don't understand the whole of the authority in great detail, so we need that information to come through to us. So I think the biggest benefit that we've seen through this process is that there is much more robustness and much better discipline in relation to payments and requests for payments that are now being put through, as we're seeing more and more people are realising that they need to provide that justification and that understanding to enable that to happen. The other thing that it's done is, which links into the question, I think, is we're seeing areas of expenditure that we understand why they're essential, we understand why they're justified. Nevertheless, there is a question around, but is there a better way of doing this? Is there a different way that we could commission that in the future? Is there a different way that we could organise ourselves around that type of expenditure? It doesn't feel like the most value for money way of doing it. So that's a piece of work that comes out. Again, that won't change this year's position, but it will change where we go in terms of future transformation. In terms of the demand management, I don't know whether Tanya wants to come in and talk that one through, but fundamentally, we've identified areas across adults and children's in terms of different ways of working, whereby the level of growth that we anticipated, we said, but there are things that we can do to help stem some of that growth going forward. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what we've been quite successful in terms of relation to that. But Tanya may have examples of what that looks like.
So just to add to that, so last year 100% of demand mitigation savings was delivered, 81% so far this year, and I'm confident we'll be as close to 100% this year. In the Appendix 3, there's a clear table there that articulates all the various examples that across adults and children's are doing to undertake those savings. I'm really happy to pick up at any of those, but But for example, there is a wonderful scheme in Shropshire called 2 Carers in the Car, which is just that. We have 2 carers in a car at 10 o'clock at night through the night, and they go in and support people that may have fallen or require nighttime support, and that has prevented older people going into a nursing home, just by example. And then you've heard many times talk about stepping stones in children's social care, around how we support families to be able to look after their children, or if they do come into care, how we step those children back out of care and back to their families. In terms of savings for next year, James has just articulated there that if you look at the figures on the page, it looks a significant amount of money to save next year. We cannot go out to this organisation and ask for another 90 million plus pounds worth of savings. What we will be putting forward is savings that are credible, savings that have got clear delivery plans, that we will be delivering 100% of those savings. We are having constant dialogue with MHCLG in terms of exceptional financial support. They understand our position. They want us to ensure that we're also delivering credible savings plans as part of the MCFS for 26 and 27.
Okay, thank you. Sam.
My original question has been fully answered in those responses, so thank you very much. I will just say how pleased I am to see all this work going into moving us to making difficult decisions based on realistic information, rather than painting a picture in the budget of a plan for the year that looks great, and then as soon as it starts getting towards delivery, the whole thing falls apart. And prior to being elected, I've spent years on parish council hearing about challenges at Shropshire Council, and then as it goes through the year, just hearing about how widely we've missed the savings targets, and it feels like we're heading towards a very different position, and that's got to be good for everyone at the council and the people of Shropshire.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd very strongly echo Sam's points just now about, you know, I'm sure we're all, as councillors, very, very grateful for the hard work that's going into understanding the financial picture and explaining it to us. And thanks to Roger as well on that. Two points, I think, from me. And just to check, the proposed under 2.8 15 million EFS to take us through this year, which personally I understand and support. Is it true that we actually had 29 million EFS last year? And so to some extent, does that show that we are stabilising the position, albeit coming down to the bottom rather faster than we'd like? And James, you mentioned points about wanting to be very clear about a turnaround to a more balanced budget for next year. So a comment on that would be useful. And secondly, perhaps picking up inadvertently Sam's point about parishes, I'm working with several parishes who are repeatedly asking for bits of outstanding works to be covered, work which have been promised and hasn't been. And there's a kind of difficulty there at the moment that officers seems very hard to pin officers down. And I've seen a plan including a speed limit past the school for this year. I've been shown that that's a priority on a plan, and then it doesn't happen. And I wonder if there's something more to be done there in terms of officers perhaps being encouraged to be a bit more frank and say, look, it's a difficult financial position. We don't like to be continually giving excuses and putting things back or promising to have things done by the end of the month yet again. Could officers and this is at the frontline level, be saying, look, there is no money this year. We have to put things back till next year. And you as parishes, some of which are reasonably well off, could perhaps be solving some of those problems yourselves. In a situation where there's a vagueness, I think we get a resentment from some of those parishes and communities thinking, what's going on here? Are they not really clear about what they're doing? But we come here and you are clear about what you're doing. So that's very strong. But is there something more that we need to look at on the messaging on that? And of course, councillors have a part to play in that, and we're going to come back to that to some extent under the last item on the agenda. Thank you.
So thanks, Chair. So in terms of the first point, in terms of EFS, this is a wider point that goes beyond the period 6, but I'm happy to pick it up if you're comfortable, Chair. It just takes us a little bit further into the wider kind of position. We've made this we've set out to MHCLG that we need £15 million for this year. Going back to last year, it was 26.9 was the figure, and we applied for 26.9 and we've used 26.8, so £100,000 below that. Now that was purely for transformational purposes, so there's nothing to do with an overspend. It was purely for transformation, and that transformation covered 3 areas. It covered capitalisation of staff and transformation work. It covered the cost of PwC as our strategic transformation partner, and it also covered the redundancy cost for staff that left under voluntary redundancy. And as Roger Evans said earlier, there was a significant amount of redundancies last year. So around nearly half of that amount just went to cover those. So the two are not comparable in that sense, because that's purely around the transformation costs. In terms of the conversations we've had with MHCLG this year, we have picked up 3 elements. So there's the 15 million around the overspend, which is one part of this. The second part was another request around transformation. So without going into detail, we can fund transformation costs from capital receipts. As long as we get the capital receipts in, then that kind of squares that off. What we did last year was we said we won't get the capital receipts in quickly enough, and therefore we asked for EFS with a view to then paying those off. We then had the outturn position deterioration, and we found that we needed to use that flexibility in year. So although the whole of last year's was used for transformation purposes, it helped us in terms of our outturn position. So this year, we have given a rough indication that we'll be looking for around £10 million of transformation EFS on top of the 15. So that takes us to 25. And then the third part relates to the North West Relief Road. And if the North West Relief Road gets written off and gets wholly charged through to revenue, the scheme gets cancelled in this financial year, there's a whole load of discussions to be had with DFT and et cetera, but at the moment the cost that will have been incurred is just short of £39 million, and that £39 million will have to be dealt with one way or another. So again, we've said to MHCLG, if everything else falls apart and we have to write off that entire cost through revenue, then that's £39 million of EFS that we would need. So those 3 elements are there together. So that's just looking at this financial year. The next step, however, is, as I mentioned before, is then looking at exceptional financial support needed next financial year and the years after. That's much more of a controlled process. So the same process applies. We make an application in December, and we hear in late February, just around the time that council sets the budget. Can sometimes be slightly after, and therefore we have to delay council if that happens. But the indications are that we should hear in late February, and then even if it's the day before council, it means that we can then take that budget report in late February. The process allows us to apply for exceptional financial support for in year and the next financial year, and that's it. And we have to make the assumption that that process will then continue each year after that. We know that we are going to need exceptional financial support for 6-7 and 7-8 and probably 8-9 and possibly further, because we've got, as Tanya said, 82 million. Well, we know that's going to probably be 90. It's probably going to be even more than that when we've worked out all the things that I talked to you mentioned before. We're not going to be able to live that in 1 year, and that's the optimism bias, and that's the whole cycle that we go around again. So we need to build that in. So what level of EFS are we talking about next year? Is it 70 million? Is it 80 million? What sort of level are we talking about? It's going to be a big figure for 6-7. And what we then need to do is to make sure that we are reducing that. So your point is absolutely correct. I think it's just a year early in a sense. We need to think about it from 6-7 and say, let's say we applied for 70 million in 6-7. Please don't this is public, but those are not figures to be quoted. This is just an example. Imagine it was £70 million next year. If it then went down to 50 million or 20 million or whatever over those years, you would see us weaning ourselves off EFS, and that would be something that NHCLG want to see us doing to demonstrate that we're not becoming reliant. And there are other authorities around this country, the Panorama report from about 12 months ago now, I think it was. Havering talked about their reliance on exceptional financial support into the long term. We don't want to be in that situation because every time you want to take exceptional financial support, you borrow. And you borrow, that includes debt charges, and those debt charges then have to be covered. So our model that we've built allows us to reduce the level of exceptional financial support, and built into that is the cost of the exceptional financial support from the previous year that we've had to build in, and therefore our savings target allows that to tear down and reduce that, so that we cover all of those costs into the future. And the obvious conclusion is, so therefore the less exceptional financial support that we need, the easier it is to wean ourselves off it, and the easier it is to cover those debt charges into the future. But all of that is part of the plan that we're working through at the moment.
Okay, thank you, James. Morning, Heather. I can see your hand is raised, but Councillor Tandy's been waiting a while, so I'll go to him first if you don't mind. John.
Yeah, I want to go to Roger's point about how many people were given redundancy. I think the amount of skills that we must have lost by all those staff going, and us trying to recover from all those staff going. And these are people that really shouldn't have gone. I mean, we should be looking at our outdoor contracts and seeing where we can make savings there, such as our waste contract, which basically costs us an absolute fortune. And we need to look at that in a big way, because it's costing us, I think it's about 43 million a year at this point in time, which basically has a 2.5% increase every year, year on year, for the next 20 years, because they had their contract extended. But at the same time, we're still kicking our staff. Are we still going for people to be made redundant? And if they are going to be made redundant, that makes their morale low, because then that means more work on the people who are left. Now, are we still going down the line of getting rid of staff?
That question, if that's okay. So you would have read the corporate peer challenge report in the summer, and they absolutely highlighted there were some services in Shropshire Council that have become too small. We're undertaking a number of essential benchmarking service reviews at the moment, in particular around finance, legal, and around Revs and Bens teams, because they're critical teams, aren't they, to ensure the functioning of Shropshire Council. You would have read in my chief exec updates that we are not looking at compulsory redundancies. However, there will be some services that do need to modernise and do need to change, and as part of that we could be doing things differently. But in terms of the benchmarking, we should be able to get some reports coming through to various committees over the next couple of months. But yeah, have my absolute commitment, as we do with the Cabinet, to make sure that we're getting the basics right.
Thank you. And just on the waste, Councillor Potter's committee's actually looking into the waste rather than us. So, yeah. Heather.
A couple of things, and I was going to say some of what Tanya has just said. We now need to also concentrate on income, and we have a number of departments that are so hollowed out now that actually there aren't improving the way we're getting our income in. So we have to balance savings against the income, and income is very important. And one of those areas where actually we are a bit understaffed is council tax, but legal have their role in that if they don't get through the paperwork involved in a number of different areas, then we don't get money coming in. So there are lots and lots of areas where we will have to invest rather than making people redundant. We need to put those in place urgently. I think we also, and this has not been mentioned this morning, need to remember that even if we put the council tax up the maximum allowed at the moment, which is 4.99%, 2% for adult social care and 3% for the rest, we only get in an extra 10 million a year-ish, slightly more than that. You cannot balance our books, even if we were stable, on 10 million a year coming in, because we know the pressures on social care across the board are on the way to 20 million. We have inflation that actually is never ever covered by what we get in from the government. And with the minimum wage and so on, we are well adrift. So the whole of the system for balancing budgets and so on is broken. But we are in a particularly bad place because, as we've heard, savings year on year have not been made in the past. So we now need to get to that position. But council tax rises just do not do it. And it's not a good message to the public to find that actually their hard-earned cash really doesn't help us. So there's a whole range of issues here that are making it more difficult, which actually feed into what we've heard this morning. I think the issue around staff wanting and telling people things are going to happen is partly that staff really do want to do things. So they're quite optimistic about stuff, and then they can't do it because they just don't have the capacity, which is why we do need to invest in some departments. But there's also a really important role for staff to be giving out realistic messages. And I think Tanya and I will deal with that one bit by bit, because the public need to know when things are going to happen. And they're much happier if they know it's not going to happen for a year, rather than being told it's going to happen in 2 months' time and then it doesn't happen. So there's work around those things, and that's about the realism within the organisation and where we invest and all the rest of it. The work with towns and parishes is particularly important because in future years that may deliver savings in different ways, but it also allows towns and parishes to feel proud of where they live. So it is really important. Just please bear in mind that some of this is against a backdrop that is very, very difficult indeed, and we do have to deliver because we do not want commissioners in.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think none of us underestimate the degree of difficulty being faced by officers and members here, and it's not going to be a quick fix. We know that. Malcolm, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, okay, sorry, two quick questions, but may not be quick answers. The 3 operations boards, when do we start to see the detail of what they're doing and the amount of savings or expenditure not done, etc.? Will that come to this committee to review at some point? And the second point is, James, obviously you talked about winter pressures, which we know are coming. What sort of provision exists in the budget at the moment for that additional winter pressures? Can you give an indication of what percentage of the budget, if you like, covers winter, if possible?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the operations boards, that is a question that we're all asking ourselves, and we're undertaking a review of that. Very happy for that information when we have it to be shared wherever. So if that goes to scrutiny, task and finish, cabinet, I don't mind where it goes, but we need to get it. So we're working through that. They've been operational now for a few months, so we should have enough data to say it's not easy to extract. It's not necessarily easy to, but there are lessons learned and there are things that we can take from it, which I think are useful. In terms of winter pressures, we've got figures there. I think it's around about just over £1 million built in for the remainder of this financial year in relation to adult services in particular. The information that we have over the last couple of years is that the level of deterioration over the winter period itself has not been overly significant, and in terms of compared to the budget that we've set for this year. But there's a risk, I think it's just about 1.1 million over the top of that. There was also the highways position as well. In that, we've only really shown 600,000 in relation to that pressure for across the winter. That's because we can claim from government. That's kind of our excess. We have to cover the first 600,000, and then above that we can claim. The risk with that is if we have a severe event. So today won't count as a severe event, and therefore is discounted in terms of the next one comes on. You can't kind of build them up until you get 600,000. Unfortunately, it has to be one event, and therefore the bigger risk really, the biggest risk I suppose is that the weather forecast suggests it's going to be cold, and therefore you send all the gritters out, and then it doesn't actually get that cold, and you've wasted all that time and grit. And then the next day, the same again, and you have to do it. And so that's probably the biggest risk, is that we actually spend a lot of money trying to keep the road safe. And then maybe you actually didn't need to do that. So if we get a mild winter, then that's not an issue. And that's really difficult to predict, because that we could be fine in March. And then suddenly we get the whole of March and massive deterioration in that, and that's before the year end. So it's difficult to predict. That's why we've always had a severe weather reserve. But back to the short-termism, in terms of the short-term one-off savings, that's been taken in previous years as something put forward by the services. We haven't used it for a couple of years, therefore we don't need it. That's the risk that we now have.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll sort of return to it under the work programme, but we'll move on for now to item 7. And I think, we've still got Rachel with us. Rachel's going to deliver this report, the performance monitoring report, Q2, please, Rachel.
Thank you. And I've got obviously Councillor Kidd that is here. It's in terms of it being her paper, and Jess Edwards is also here to take any particular questions as well as we go through. So I'll just give a bit of an overview, if I may. This paper presents the performance position against the Shropshire Plan strategic objectives for Q2 of the financial year. It uses performance indicators, or KPIs, as part of our performance framework to measure, drive and understand the delivery of our outcomes and objectives. This paper describes our new position and the newly updated metrics in this quarter. And we've actually updated the format this quarter to take on board and provide additional information following feedback from Cabinet, from the leader and from the committee, in terms of having a more detailed understanding. It should be seen, and I know we reiterate this every time, alongside the interactive dashboard that's been developed as well. And I think the other point is, this is, whilst some things that might have been included in this report, that was a point in time position. And if you look at the dashboard, it's obviously live and may have been updated since then. So if I particularly come to the performance position, it's Q2, there was 41 measures that had been updated. 14 of those are grey because we might not have a target for various reasons. They might have changed the definition, or a target isn't appropriate. The measures might also be for reference only, or awaiting a baseline. So of those 27 that have newly reported and do have a target against them, 74 are above the target in green, 4% were similar, so they were amber, and 22% are below target and are exceptions. And I'll just pull out and highlight a couple of those which are detailed within the report. So just before I go into some of the ones that are below target and exceptions, just want to highlight a couple of areas of improvement, or green. Firstly, we continue to have a high percentage of pupils receiving their first choice of both primary and secondary schools compared to the England average. There's a second target just around our recycling figures, and I know that was picked up in the last report. So our rates are now at 52.7%, which means we're meeting the target for the first time since Q3 in 24-25. And this period does cover April to June. So they were the warmer months where residents obviously would be disposing of more garden waste there. And spring, particularly this year, was very good for growing. And so we did see a boost in subscriptions as well. The final thing just to draw your attention to is around our agency staff, and that has continued to fall. That's now down to 3.1% of our workforce being agency staff, and that obviously has been a significant drive to bring staff in and to reduce those agency costs where we can. If you look at some of the information in terms of our kind of true agency spend, it wasn't before we moved to Opus, our new system, it was about 12 million, and I think now we're looking at about 6 million. So it's a significant drop in terms of what we're bringing in terms of agency, and that's been across the organisation. It isn't just in one particular area. We've seen that in highways, shire services, and in social care services. So just in terms of some of the exceptions that we just wanted to draw your attention to, then 3 exceptions last quarter continue to be exceptions. The first one is around EHCP, so our educational health and care plans. They are we have seen an improvement, and we do expect to see an improvement, but as with other councils, we're still continue to struggle in terms of the increasing numbers of requests that have been made, while a restructure of the team has also impacted on this. Despite creating specific teams and recruiting permanent staff resources, still struggling to meet that rise in demand. There is a focus, though, on continued professional development here and on implementing weekly performance monitoring. Staff sickness is another area that, again, has continued to be an exception, and it continues to be that way. Staff sickness, you can see reported within this report. It is shows high levels around anxiety and stress, kind of building on some of those last points that were raised and we know came through our CPC. What I would say is this is up until September. And the pulse survey again will be shortly out, which we hope we'll start to see some change in terms of sickness and staff morale. We do have a people's plan, and we've got other schemes that are coming into place. So we're hoping that we will see a shift in this the staff sickness of this quarter, notwithstanding that we will be coming up to winter shortly. There's another target again around households in B&Bs that continue to be an exception. And just to say again that this was we have opened, and there is opening some new accommodation. So we have got some additional accommodation, around 50 beds that we expect to open throughout October and November, which should see this number start to decrease. And we know there's a number of issues that are happening within this area that have impacted on those numbers and on those delays around handovers, around voids, etc. And those are being looked into, but we are expecting to see new properties coming online, and we would hope to see a shift in the next period. And then the final area that I just wanted to draw your attention to is particularly around the suicide rate. This is a partnership target, so it cannot just be delivered by Shropshire Council and the teams and the work that we're doing it across. This is a very complex target, but it's right that we keep that in here. We are above the national average. We are showing similar rates to other comparator areas, so more rural areas such as Shropshire. We are seeing higher rates of suicide in those areas. There is a well-established multi-agency suicide prevention group that has got a robust action plan, and they're continue to review the actions within that action plan with partners. It's absolutely shared responsibility. This is absolutely something we want to see fall, and it requires every partner to work together and do their part. And they're just some of the areas that I was just going to draw your attention to. You'll have read the report, but happy that we can take questions, or certainly take those away and get more information where we need to. And I'll just pause there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Dawn.
I've just got a couple of points. With regard to the B&B placements, it said in the report that there's been a 25% reduction in available properties, social housing. Why is that? And it also says that you've got more people presenting as homeless. And what's the reasoning behind that? Is that there being more that more Section 21s are being issued at the moment? Is there a contraction in the private supply? And there's been a decrease in social housing provision. So just like a little bit more information on that. This one is one of my big bugbears. High-speed data provision. There's a claim that 99.7% of households have access to super-fast broadband. Well, I'd be interested in knowing what the measurement methodology of that is, because they clearly excluded Claverley and Worfield as an entire parish, because we're absolutely nowhere near that. And it's giving a really distorted perception of the availability of this thing, and it's going to have a huge impact on the whole transition from acute to community, our ability to provide those services going forwards, if we haven't got the basic infrastructure that enables people to utilise the sort of technologies that people are talking about. So I don't know what the measurement methodology is, but 99.7 is clearly, to me, a distortion. It's giving a very false picture of what we've actually got available out there. Thank you.
Sure.
So I'll answer what I can, because as you can appreciate, I'm not the specialist in any of these areas, and I think that's with the performance report. But so I think this comes back to the point from the previous committee. We do need to make sure you get the additional information through. So I might come to Jess in a minute just around the measurement of the digital, because I know there's been lots of questions and challenges around that, and how that is absolutely calculated. In terms of the households, again, there is a bit of information in the report around some of the challenges that we've had. I think it's been quite complex in terms of the turnaround times for void properties. We've had a reduction in what's actually been made available, and then there is delays again in some of the temporary facilities coming on board. I will get some more detailed information in terms of that, unless anybody else has additional information. I'll get that from the service manager, so I will record that as an action and take that away, Councillor, if that's okay. I don't know if Jess wants to come in then on the digital, or Councillor Kiddo.
Yeah, sure. So this metric that was around broadband and the infrastructure to deliver that, not necessarily the connectivity to it, is through, it's called Think Broadband. So it's an online public source data set that we use, and absolutely happy to review that and see if we can change that metric and agree something different, if that's, it does give a distorted view. So I think it is important as well that we look at that in the future.
Can I come in, David? Because
Yes,
I challenge that as well, because it's a huge problem in that we've had 2 of the delivery contracts for fibre go out of business. Open and then BD UK have had to reappoint, and they've now stretched the target for full fibre delivery to 2030, which is very disappointing to say the very least, because it was 2026. So this the way we measure that is very misleading, and it isn't good for our communities across the board. And so I did challenge it at the time. It's the way they measure it, but we need, if we're going to continue to do this, we need to put a significant note in against it, because certainly my parishes are definitely not chuffed about the way forward, and it's not the case. And if we are looking at it in those terms, and that's picked up by central government, then everything's fine and rosy in rural areas, and it certainly is not.
Indeed, it isn't. No, thank you. Sam.
The report has a couple of areas where difficulty recruiting staff is one of the factors in missing targets, so the HCP team and food hygiene inspections. Do we understand why we are finding it difficult to recruit, and what are we doing to make the council a more appealing place for people to work so we can overcome this problem?
If I could just come back on that, I think one of the so I think, yes, so there's a big bit of work for us now to do. I've mentioned very briefly, and it will be coming to Cabinet later this week. We have developed a people's plan, so I think that's really important. That people's plan is really about trying to have an overall view of what is happening within the organisation, how we make the council, how we make our workforce feel valued, excel, how we make it more attractive, how we retain capability capacity. Many of the comments that picked up earlier and increased morale. So there's quite a lot of work going on to bring that together and have one kind of developed through some of the conversations we've had with staff, feedback from the CPC, members and others to pull that together too. I think coming to your final point really around making sure that we you know, despite the difficulties that we're seeing, we can make the council sustainable, we can create a healthy workforce, etc. So that piece of work, we absolutely recognise that, and recognise the importance of our people to our organisation. So that is really critical in terms of our pathway to doing that. I think as part of that, as you said, certain areas are having problems recruiting. That is absolutely part of our kind of planning going forward. I can't, without going into the detail of particular service areas, some are, there's complexity there in terms of for different areas. Some are national skill shortages, some are access to training, some are kind of localised, and we need to look at those. So what we'll be doing is working through, as I said, we've got the overarching people's plan, and areas within that will hopefully look to make the whole organisation and have that clear plan that people know what the sort of things we'll be doing in terms of retaining capacity, celebrating success. There's a range of factors in there. And then as part of that, and as part of our service planning going forward, we absolutely will be doing a deep dive into sustainability and succession planning within areas and understanding what training resources we need to do. We do that in some teams already, but what we're trying to do is bring forward kind of an approach that's much more systematic across the organisation. I'm happy to take away and again speak to those individual teams to understand in specific areas, but there is some generic themes there really around, as I said, kind of national shortages, making the organisation attractive, skills and training, and we're looking to address some of those. Hopefully that answers some of your kind of question.
Yes, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And this sort of goes back to the point on the previous meeting and talked about in the minutes, which it may have even been me that raised it. We've got 85 criteria that we're measuring. Is there a danger that we're trying to measure too much at the moment? We are in financial crisis, as we know, declared a financial emergency. Should we be looking at a core subset of these and focusing on those, and I can't believe I'm saying this, actually relax some of the other ones which are less essential at this current point, to sort of say this is what's really, really important for us over the next few weeks and months?
That's a good question. I know some of them are statutory and have to be collected and published, but Rachel.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. So we just again, I think, for exactly the reasons you said, we are about to again publish, the council will be publishing its improvement plan, and that will have KPIs and metrics in a subset of some of the ones that we're talking about here, and they will be the ones we will absolutely have to focus on, monitor, and agree. And so that's a smaller set of KPIs. What we're trying to, so I think that's the first thing to say, which I think answers your question. We will need to focus on those and report those back through cabinet into the improvement board, etc. I think we do, as the chair rightly pointed out, we actually have to report on a whole range of indicators. We've got a new set coming, LGOF, coming through that we will have to report on, and we need to report on. What we are doing is working with Jess's team, is building a kind of performance framework triangle with kind of those really high level KPIs at the top, and then detailed ones that go down to services, and eventually there's the individual ones that sit in people's sort of appraisals, good conversations. What I would say is this is a really good point in time. Again, we'll also be having the corporate plan, which is the kind of final bit in terms of which the improvement plan will sit. That gives us a really good point to review all of this. And to review the metrics that we've got and what metrics we need going forward. But what I would say is at the moment, absolutely those subset of KPIs will be, we will need to monitor those very closely. But for statutory reasons, we do need to monitor a range of them, and it's something about being proportionate within that, making sure that the right indicators are being monitored within teams and escalated by exception where we need to, and that the board's fully cited and given the assurance that we're monitoring that. So hopefully, I guess there's a couple of things. That one, certainly we need to review all of these. I would suggest in light of the new corporate plan when that comes. At the moment, there will be a subset that is coming that we will absolutely need to focus on, and we're looking at the system to make sure that gives clarity and updates in terms of assurance. But I'll pause there because I know Councillor Kidd wants to come in.
Just to add to that, and I've had these conversations with both Jess and Rachel. If we're going to be investing, if we get our EFS and we're investing in departments, we will have to measure how effective and how well those investments are. So I'm sure that nobody would want us to be investing money, as I've seen in the past, and not know what it's achieved. So we really do need to do those just as part of the work of the improvement board. The nebulous nature of what happened in the past, for me in opposition, was very difficult because we didn't know actually what it was delivering for us. And I don't want us, as we go forward, to be in that position again, which is why this report, this performance report, has to be very meaningful to everybody. And we are stuck to a certain extent by statutory reporting that we have to do. So I think we have to concentrate for ourselves around those things that are important to us as an organisation. And as Rachel has said, there is a much smaller dashboard that will be going to the improvement board. but it is difficult to reduce it too much, actually.
Thank you. Don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. Rosemary.
Thank you. No, I wouldn't disagree with that. Just a quick question on the FOIs. We've got planned improvements that are in place or coming into place. I just really wanted to know when those will have an impact on the performance on FOIs, because I think it seems to me that it's a bit of a sort of, it generates more of itself if we don't answer in time. I think people who feel that there's something being hidden, and so that generates more FOIs, and I think it's just a sort of downward spiral if we can't get a grip of it.
Yes,
If I may, Chair, there's a report coming to Audit Committee next week from myself and from the leader in terms of the action that we've taken over the last 7 to 8 weeks. I am pleased to say today there has been a slight improvement on our FOI compliance. Not going quickly enough. For those of you that know me well know that I like to go fast, but I'm pleased to say that there has been an improvement. And you're absolutely right, Rosemary. We need to get to a position where we get on top of our backlog of FOIs, but also do things differently. And you've heard myself and the leader say about us being much more open and transparent to the public, and therefore that should reduce the number of FOIs that come into this council, because we can say the information is already out there for the public to be able to see.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you for that, Rachel. We'll now move to item 8, report to the Partnership Working Task and Finish Group. Dawn, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll now present the initial findings of the Shropshire Partnership Task and Finish Group. This is just a summary of the verbal report delivered earlier to Cabinet. The full report is obviously online for everyone to see. The group carried out primary and secondary research covering various areas throughout Shropshire, and we saw a number of witnesses. The research identified 3 key strategic areas that will be essential to success. Within these 3 areas, our specific recommendations are in the full report. These 3 areas are going to be critical to the success of the Shropshire Partnership and must be dealt with by the administration, and include communication, support and training, and essential information. The recommendations made provide the foundations of the partnership. If the partnership is built on weak foundations, we can expect collapses later on. Within the communication strategy, we recommend that you start this by providing all participants with the results of the survey that they completed. I don't know whether this has been done yet, but at the time of the Task and Finish Group, it hadn't been, and it was causing frustration amongst respondents. Support and training. Failure in this area will mean that people simply don't have the skills, capability or willingness to make the plan work. Now, the essential information, before people can or will be willing to engage with Shropshire Council about the transfer of services, it is critical that they are given full information about the services to be transferred, what the current cost of these services is to Shropshire Council, how much money will town and parish councils be given to carry out these services locally, and what the ongoing financial arrangements are going to be. I'm still hearing frustration from parish councils about the lack of information in this area. What exactly will be expected of them, and what help will they be given? Now, we identified a number of very important considerations, so I will reiterate those here quickly. If the administration wish the transfer of services to start happening in year 26-27, discussions between town and parish council chairs and clerks and Shropshire Council and street scene officers must start immediately. I do hope that that has already started to happen. Failure to enter into discussions now will mean that the town and parish councils will be unable to set their budgets appropriately to take account of any service transfers, and this will inhibit or maybe even prevent service transfers in the coming year. Witnesses from street scene at Shropshire Council assured me that this information is available and can be given out, so I would hope to hear that this has started to happen. The considerable reliance on volunteers, which are our town and parish councillors, could inhibit the success of this programme. Engaging with and motivating volunteer networks is very different from managing direct employee relationships. However the administration decide to proceed, careful consideration must be given to the impacts on and expectations of our amazing volunteer town and parish councillors. If solutions are not genuinely developed in conjunction with them, there is a significant risk of resignations and a potentially catastrophic impact on our local democracies, and I feel very strongly about that. The Shropshire Partnership has the potential to provide community and financial benefits. However, if the administration fails to get these foundations right, there is the possibility of not only failing to realise the financial and or community benefits, but they could also further damage what are already very fragile relationships between Shropshire Council and its town and parish councils and residents. If the transfer of street scene services goes well, this could very well build trust and aid future developments. If it goes badly, it could undermine the whole partnership plan. So, next steps. Phase 2 is going to look at the concept of clustering arrangements and how this might work in Shropshire. We will aim to examine different possible approaches. Again, we will be conducting primary and secondary research to evaluate the options. We will undertake to speak with stakeholders in different geographies and examine the feasibility of different approaches with them. The involvement of SALC in this area will be considered. The focus will be on practical applications on the ground, including the skills, willingness and capacity of stakeholders. We've also just recently been asked to examine the opportunities provided by community boards, and this will include engagement with the SIL Task and Finish group, which is about to start running. Phase 3, which will be conducted later or mid part of next year, I'd guess. In summary, we will be looking at existing stakeholder relationships, including the 3-9 services, the NHS and others, and clarifying the current position by stakeholder group and locality. I have become aware that there's quite a lot of work already been undertaken by the council officers with regard to developing partnerships with various different parties, and we will be looking into that because there's absolutely no point reinventing the wheel. If what we've got currently is good, then we can take that forward and roll it out in other areas. The aim of this will be to identify a clear where we are now position and then map this against the administration's where they want to be positioned. Conduct a gap analysis to highlight issues, possibilities and risks. Summary recommendations are that we recommend that the Task and Finish group carry out a scrutiny review of phase 1, the transfer of street scene to Shrewsbury, Shifnal and Oswald Street 6 months after the transfer, to gather the learning from these areas. And we also recommend that we provide scrutiny of the foundations development phase relating to the success or otherwise of the communication, support and training and information provision building blocks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for the report. Councillor Wagner, for the benefit of those listening in or watching in, we're joined by the Deputy Leader, Councillor Alex Wagner, who is the Cabinet Member primarily responsible for this task. So anything you want to add, Alex?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, a few things there. And first of all, I said a Cabinet, but thank you very much, Dawn and others on that Task and Finish for putting together what I think is a really excellent report. It's genuinely very helpful, and I think it probably underlines what I think is some quite strong cross-party commitment to making partnership working function. You know, it is new for Shropshire Council. Before I speak on the recommendations, I think part of the not issue we face, but challenge is someone could very easily have worked for Shropshire Council from day one in 2009, and at no point until May have been told that town and parishes were particularly important. You know, to be totally blunt on that, actually, this has been massively underutilised. That is structural as well as cultural as well as policy. And at the moment, we're putting policy in place, but actually it has to permeate a bit deeper over time. I think it will. I think it already is. But I think some of the issues that we've faced in getting this going underline the fact that actually this style of working is new for this council. It isn't something we've done before on any scale, or where we've done it for our purposes rather than for sort of collective purposes, which I think is really what we're trying to do now. There were 4 recommendations laid out in the report in advance, which were about communication, training, information and scrutiny. I'm going to speak on each of those briefly. On communication, including the town and parish survey results, officers have now compiled that. as has been the case in many bits of town and parish work, I've been going on the basis that we'd had about 60 or 70 of our 153 reply. We actually have 93 reply. I have keen town and parishes in Shropshire who want to work with us and want to do more. We've compiled a sort of page on that, which will be going out, I think, today, actually, alongside further details on street scene. But we have put that together now, so that's one of the recommendations in there. One of the other recommendations is about sufficient training for clerks and a single point of contact at Shropshire Council. We will get a single point of contact at Shropshire Council. I can't recall, actually, I looked at officers, whether that post is being recruited or whether that post is being moved internally, but we will be at the point where we have a lead officer on that whose job it is to derive this work. One of my frustrations in getting this going, obviously, in inheriting a council with a different path on this, is it hasn't been anyone's job per se. There's been lots of people and lots of bodies, whether it's street scene or finance or the political leadership or the scrutiny element, but actually there has been no single officer contact to drive this. We need that if we want to make this work. The idea was always to get pilots up and running and kind of not let good and perfect be enemies this year, but actually if we want to make this work over time, we will do that, and we are in the process of making that happen. We've also, in the documentation going out about street scene, made a commitment as a sort of service level agreement level to make sure clerks have the appropriate training, and our street scene team have already spoken to all of the pilot areas about that. I'm going to park the third one on sharing information and come back to that at the end. On scrutiny review, of course, we thoroughly encourage that, and I think the phasing makes a lot of sense. Just in terms of timeline, we're now at the point where we're in negotiation with pilot areas over exactly what form that's going to take. We're very hopeful that that comes good, if you like, and is mutually agreeable, because all of this has to be mutually agreeable. And we will make sure that as much information as possible comes back about that. On sharing information, the reason I've singled that out is because I think this is the only one of the recommendations where, though we are improving, I think it's probably where we as an administration need to place the most focus, because, as I say, I go back to that point about it's possible to have been in this authority since day one and to have never really considered this as important. Because of that, I think there is a level of unnecessary risk aversion to working with parishes. We don't see parishes as professional, when actually not all of them are. Some are voluntary in the main, but a lot of them are large professional organisation. Shrewsbury Town Council, which I sit on, has 90 staff. You know, it's a big organisation with serious responsibilities, and actually part of that risk aversion, I think, isn't replicated with our existing contracts. So I can tell you for a fact, having walked around my own ward, that there are bins we're currently paying to be collected to our contractors that don't exist. That doesn't happen at the town and parish level. That does happen with a lot of our contracts at the moment, and we have to address those issues. But we also have to acknowledge that we need that trusting relationship, and in particular when it comes to the fact that we're not just talking about having a contract or having a commercial relationship with a parish. We're talking about delegating authority and power at the same time. We're not going to be Big Brother looking over the shoulder of them. We're going to be saying, look, if you think you can do a better job, we're happy to, as long as you can meet some minimums, give you that sort of minimum funding required and go away with it, make it work for your community. We have to get better at sharing information, and I think some of the other things there about having a single point of contact in scrutiny will improve that. But for me, that's almost the number one focus at the moment. And we have made a commitment by the end of this week to get all of the information required over to our pilot areas, which we have to do. Another frustration there is, of course, this is pretty much the last possible moment to which we could do that. We could have done it a month ago. We should have done it a month ago. But as I say, we were trying to do this as quickly and fairly as possible and improve as we go. A final point about the voluntary capacity of town and parishes. That I think what we really want to be achieving, and I think the phased approach to scrutiny and what we're trying to do will make this happen, is offer places what they can do. So lots of towns and parishes at the very small voluntary level. I often raise, I grew up in Melverley Parish, which precepts £500 a year. You know, that's never going to be one of those areas which takes on lots and lots. But actually, they're a great example of a really proactive parish. They already do a lot of flooding and do a lot of community work, and they could have volunteers take on certain roles. They're never going to be the sort of place that is likely to go for a large-scale delegation of services, but there are still things we can do for them. And the fact that they won't doesn't mean that we shouldn't have an offer for the larger places that are capable of doing that on more scale and perhaps protecting bigger services, because with our financial pressures, it will become a question of protection beyond a certain point. So I think we're trying to build a bit of a coalition of the willing at the moment. And as a final reflection, the big positive for me has been we've had so much enthusiasm from parish councils that actually we can't cope with the demand to do things differently and get more services delegated and get information over. And we have to fix that ourselves, because there is a good, hard-headed financial reason why this makes a lot of sense for us. But I think it is refreshing to me that actually even some of those smaller volunteer-led ones, you know, some volunteers go, I'd rather volunteer for an organisation with a bit of power and influence that can do things than sit on a parish that might maintain a park. And that's it. Some will be happy with that, don't get me wrong, and that's perfectly commendable. But I think there's lots of places I can think in Benell Division, Cheswood Island, Hobnet, Market Drayton, Eastern Rural, where actually volunteer parishes are frankly not far off a declaration of independence if we don't get our acting gear. So I will leave it there and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dawn. Anybody got any? Yes. No.
I think just following on from that bit, Alex, I think for me the frustrating part of all the work that's been done, which is, I mean, it's great, I'm really to support this, is that rural parish bit. You know, to say town and parishes, you know, you said Shrewsbury Town has 90 members of staff. You know, Morton Say Parish has one part-time clerk and a number of volunteers, and they meet 5 or 6 times a year. So, and that was a bit of a frustrating thing for me, was what is, you know, the examples and the pilot schemes were given were towns, quite large towns. Most of Shrewsbury is not large towns. Most of Shropshire, is not large towns. So I think just to be able to give some more examples and how could it work for, you know, a small parish in some of the things you talked about, I think that would be really helpful, because there was a bit of, I guess, confusion, scepticism, maybe even cynicism out in some of the parish saying, I'm doing all this work for nothing. Why should I take on more work for nothing, taking it from people who get paid as they do? You know? So I think that's sort of the area maybe needs to on that sort of concept. Thank you.
Yes, well, one at a time, and then Dawn will answer each one. But, yeah, so you'd like to deal with that point, and then.
Okay. Yeah, it came across very, very strongly within the task and finish group that there is a significant difference between the pilots, which are Alex's domain, and he's taking that forward in advance of what we're actually doing to find the information out. My own town and parishes, my own parish councils are smaller, some very tiny, and there is more resistance amongst those areas. So we're certainly going to be looking more at that in the next phase of what is feasible. We're trying to get witnesses from various different sizes, areas throughout the county. But obviously these were some fundamental recommendations to enable the administration to get this project, these pilot schemes up and running. Thank you.
Thanks. Chris, you next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the report. I sort of several 100% welcome the initiative and the direction of travel behind this. Alex mentioned the possibility of UDI in some parts of Benell Division, and there's certainly one parish which is saying we could do all this ourselves. We're happy to do this as volunteers. We're practical people who know about this kind of stuff. Otherwise, what are we getting for our council tax? And that's been said to me a couple of times. I mean, in jest, of course, but it's a serious recognition of the fact. I think there is great enthusiasm there. There's better information about local needs there. There's lower cost or nil cost options, and a number of those parish councils have money themselves, which they could be chipping in, and that's not being tapped yet. 2 points to pick up today. I think one is, Dawn, you mentioned the clustering focus of the next bit of work, and I suppose while I totally understand that myself in terms of management, logistics, and the number of different councils that Shropshire Council itself might end up dealing with, I think looking at the parishes I work with, there is such a diversity between them that that kind of clustering might require some special dating site or some special extra training or whatever to help move it forward. That's not to say that's got to be where things end up. I completely agree, but there may be some challenges on the way. And the second point to finish with is on behalf of Church Spring Parish Council, with the Church Spring Hewley Kenley, I should say, which is the most advanced of my parish councils. There's been a bit of concern that it has been hard to find some of the very basic practical stuff out, like what kind of things should they be thinking about on insurance, which must be quite a generic issue for any kind of partnership that we're looking at. What about working with the council on materials and signs and things like that? Surely, again, that must be, tools, a generic thing to find out, and things like risk assessments. How best should we, as our parish council, do these risk assessments, and how are we going to get a bit of advice about that? I'm in a Teams meeting later with somebody who said she doesn't actually know about these, even though we are some way down the road, and she doesn't seem to be very keen to comment on them. But maybe Alex's paper, which is coming out today, is good to solve all that. Thank you.
Right. Sure.
I'll leave Alex to deal with the risk assessment and the insurance elements of that. But I want to assure members that we are not going into phase 2 under the impression, assumption or anything else that clustering is going to be a good thing. We are going to investigate it in regard to whether it might work, the issues that we'd face, be those personality issues, be those geography issues or whatever. We know all of these things are relevant to the success of the project. So there is no predetermination whatsoever in this is the way it's going. It may well be that we're proving it's not the right way to go and making recommendations along those lines. I'll hand over to Alex for the...
Yeah, and I think there's two things there. So one, on just briefly on clustering, I think that's exactly right. And the smaller rural parishes, there's the economy of scale issue. But I'll use Baston Hill as maybe an example here, where they've got 2,500 residents, a lot of SIL, because there's quite a lot of development around there, and they're right next door to Shrewsbury. And actually the decision that Baston Hill might have to make, and I've had this conversation with the local member and some of the parish councillors there, is it better to be the 18th bit of Shrewsbury and have 1/18 of a central service, or to go it alone and do it completely on your own and have that complete local autonomy? Actually, it isn't for this organisation to decide that for Baston. It's for them to decide which they prefer, but we can facilitate that one way or another. Certainly not immediately, but over time we can certainly facilitate that. And there are many such examples where actually we can't get too in the weeds, in my view, about what is right or wrong for them. Actually, part of this process is about delegating the authority to make a decision without us looking over their shoulder. I think on the information and training point, I think what the street scene team have put together over the last 3 or 4 months is really good. As I say, we're having some final discussions with contractors this week about the finances, and then we have been in negotiation to some level or another with the pilot areas already. We've made a commitment by the end of this week to make sure they have absolutely everything so that their members can decide on whether or not to proceed. We're pretty confident that we've got a reasonable sort of deal. What I would say though is part of the problem goes back to perhaps the point that Councillor Tandy was making earlier about redundancies, or perhaps the point I was making about the fact that we're paying for bins to be collected in my ward that don't exist. Actually, no one who directly works for Shropshire Council has done a lot of this work for many, many years. There's no member of the previous administration here to defend themselves, so I won't go in, but the project was about outsourcing and about getting external contractors to do all of this work, and about not having that in-house. And what that means is we don't have it in-house right now. So we are at the position where we have a street scene team of 2 officers, one of whom is working around the clock to try and make this work and get all this information out and understand it. But when you've got 2 officers and the contract controls that we've had over the last few years, actually you're always going to have that issue with the bins, or that issue with to some extent, this is a chance to have a bit of a clean slate and work backwards from good, rather than assume that what is currently going on is to a high standard or is to be emulated by a parish if they had delegated power. So I think for me, that's the nub of some of the issues we face is actually we don't have many directly or any in some cases directly employed people who do have the full information. That's a problem at this council. Obviously, this would solve it because it would mean a change, but we have to navigate that pretty carefully. It's also why I was quite keen to make sure we force ourselves to get all that information about pilot schemes ready this year rather than wait another 12 months, because actually we need to figure out what the serious underlying operational issues are rather than assume that what we are paying on a piece of paper someone to do is happening, because as I say, those bins don't exist.
Thank you. Beverly.
Thank you. Ludlow employs 17 people. We have a clerk, a deputy clerk, and quite a large number of full-time and part-time staff. Most of our precept is going on paying their wages. Tonight I'm going to a Ludford meeting. They have a part-time clerk. They have no expenses. They have the precept is very, very low because they have no expenses, but all the building work is going on in Ludford. They use Ludlow for everything. They come into town, the schools are in Ludlow, everything is coming into Ludlow. You might have a problem with Ludlow councillors thinking, well, why do we have to take on all of this when Ludford is paying nothing at all towards it? So I think that could be a little bit of an issue for Ludlow. I'm not speaking on behalf of them because I'm not allowed to, but I do know that it's always been an issue that Ludford pays nothing towards Ludlow and uses everything in Ludlow, and Ludford doesn't want to pay anything into us because they're buying some poo bins for their dogs. Well, that's what happened in the last meeting I was at anyway.
That's pretty widespread actually, Beverly. You get the same thing in my area, Market Trade. A lot of the facilities are used by people in the surrounding villages, and their councils don't want to make a contribution towards it, but people sometimes have to change their positions over time. So it's a work in progress, that one, I think.
I suppose just on that, I think this is for next year. These are the really important questions. How does this fit together? I think there's also, probably if we're being really pragmatic, because all of these agreements have to be bipartite. So the county has to agree that with the parish in any instance. So there's no way of forcing a parish to take something on. There's no way, there might be political pressure, for example, in some cases, or an obvious imperative, but it has to be agreed by members of both councils, fundamentally. The pragmatic approach then, in my view, and we're starting to have those discussions, I think, over library services as one example, are where you've got Shrewsbury and Bicton, say, where Shrewsbury has 45,000 chimney pots and Bicton has 200. We probably don't really mind if they use Shrewsbury Library. The numbers would be so small if we were having that discussion about sharing services or parishes having involvement in it, that it's not immaterial, but it's not going to prevent or stop something from happening. When you have maybe Oswestry and Mauder, or Bridgnorth and Tasley, or maybe Ludlow and Ludford is just as good an example, I think we do need some sort of a recommended arrangement in place, because actually you do get to the point there quickly where, especially, I use libraries as an example, where you've got primary schools that might be in the rural next door area using it, where you've got a huge amount of housing development, where you've got all of these things. Actually, there probably has to be almost a bar at which we do start saying, well, actually, if 10 or 20% of the users of this service are from your parish, there has to be some expectation of a contribution. I say the issue we face is there is no obligation to agree, and we are talking about services that are really stretched and where the money has to come from somewhere. So I think we have to have a policy on that. But for me, it's one of the most difficult questions about this whole body of work, because actually there will be areas where members of a parish simply hold out and say we're not contributing, and it's awkward if you're in one of the, it flips the situation a bit. If you're in one of the bigger towns, you go, well, do we want to lose a service, or will we just put up with this? In most cases, I suspect they'll put up with it, but that isn't necessarily fair. So I think we have to put some suggestions, but again, these agreements do have to be sort of bipartite. So there has to be mutual agreement, and obviously some partners won't have much of an incentive to mutually agree. Community boards, which were briefly mentioned, I should say, might be a mechanism by which some we're in the very early stage of investigating, might be a mechanism by which some of this stuff can be coordinated more. So the idea, which I know Scrutiny are going to be investigating, is looking at the allocation of SIL local. And instead of having the sort of place plans set up and actually having boards with members and parishes and some officers on who make the decision about where it's spent, you know, for me, that members are much better at deciding where a crossing is going to go, and parishes are than I hate to say it, people sitting in this building in general. Actually, that's a better principle to set. Obviously, at the point at which you have more say over funding, if you're engaged in partnership work, there becomes more of a to and fro about those sorts of issues. So I think that might help coordinate it a bit, but we're in really embryonic stages looking at that.
Yeah, the risk of to be some overlaps, I think, aren't there, with that? Meant to be. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Not my area, but as a local councillor, there were, not sure if anybody around this panel today was involved, you might have been, Chairman, the LJCCs were so-called, and in my area it worked, and we were all disappointed when they stopped. So community boards, parish councils want to work together, and if they do, the smaller ones especially can pool some of the resources. We, as a local councillor, and the parish council working together can do more than individually. So yeah, it is a way forward. And community boards or whatever, that is what needs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I still miss the one that we had in Market Drake. It worked very well indeed. And it wasn't just the giving out of money, it worked well for sharing ideas, and data collection, intelligence gathering, and all sorts of things. So I'm personally very enthusiastic about the concept of a community board. So that's another phase. Just one little question from me to the portfolio holder concerning scope, really. Because there are one or two feelings around that perhaps there are some no-go areas or some objects or some areas that we are not open to sharing. I'm assuming that there aren't actually any no-go areas, that anything is possible.
I think we have to consider absolutely everything with this. Yeah. And I don't think there's any particular policy area that can consider itself totally immune. You know, that's
always been my response, but I just wanted to double check as you were here. Right, thank you. Everybody content now with that report? Thank you very much, Dawn. Well done. Look forward to seeing the next one. And we'll just slip quickly into item 9, the work programme. So it's been circulated. Some of the things are now ticked off. You can see what's going on. But earlier we had. And I'll come back to you, Dawn. You've the first 2 or 3 items you had on your list about the financial report and the things you wanted answers to. And I said it's probably better done through a task and finish. Just remind me what those were. Yeah. So what we're proposing here is a task and finish for budget scrutiny, really, in essence. So we would need to work up a format for that. Yes, terms of reference for that. Could that? It's too quick. Is it 1st of December for that?
A little bit.
Just a little bit. Okay. So what after December? When's the next meeting?
I don't know. Sorry. January, but I don't know.
Do we have one in January?
No, February.
February.
No, sorry.
Well, that'll do. Yeah,
February.
Yeah, February.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't.
That's okay then, Dawn. We'll stick that to work up some terms of reference for February. Yeah. Well, it's your proposal, so yeah, just check it. And it'll give us a chance to have a word with the professionals, because obviously they've got a lot of work on at the moment. So we don't want to overload them. We need to pick a time when they've got at least an hour or 2 to spare for us. So, okay, and that's likely to be February once all the figures are in place.
So that's great. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. You're happy that we do that? Yeah, nobody's opposed. Okay, that takes us nicely to the end. And just a reminder that 2 weeks today we'll be back again. That's the next meeting of this committee, and hopefully next time we'll have the capital strategy to look at as well as the Presumably period 7, James. You'll have. Thank you. Immediately following this, there's a discussion with about the improvement board and how we're going to relate. But now is the end of our meeting, so thank you very much. Those of you who are online and who want to be at the next one, you're going to have to go off and